Hello, everybody, and this is an overview of the chapter 5 in the digital marketing analytics textbook. And we're just going to go over a couple of sections here today to clarify a couple of points, but then also to connect some of these points to some of the earlier topics that you may have recently learned, specifically as it relates to different types of media like owned, paid, earned, and then also from earlier in this textbook itself, which relates directly to the ways that um, data is captured. And I think all of this together will come into a better discussion and a better point of emphasis as it relates to the whole business framework, which comes together with digital marketing analytics framework overall. And so there are a ton of slides that come with this chapter. I'm jumping in right in slide 5, and we're going to go pretty quickly through some of these because I think it's, some of these we can kind of jump through, and I really wanted to focus more on the latter couple of sections rather than this one. I think this first section is pretty straightforward. The decision making framework is basically, you want to question things, you want to figure out what your business question is, what's the problem that you're trying to solve. And there's these elements here that go with it. I won't go too much into detail, but then you collect the data, which comes with the curate step. Then you analyze the data, figure out, okay, what is it that I'm actually looking at? What is it that the data is showing? And then optimizing is actually coming up with those recommendations. And this is an important slide that did want to show, which is all of the 4 steps together. And really, I would call attention to the subheadings, the little descriptions in each box. First, what is the business question that is coming up here in the decision-making framework? What are you trying to solve? That is something that I think is missing a lot in the real world. In my own experience, a lot of times people just want to look at data to look at data. However, I think it's important that there is a goal in mind. What's the point of all this? Why are you doing it? And then from there, go to number 2, which is actually collecting the numbers that go with it. What are the metrics? What are the analytics? What is the data that comes along? Step 3 is actually do the analysis. Now that you have the data, you know what you're looking for. What are the numbers saying? And this is what I think a lot of people just jump to is they're like, oh, here's some numbers in front of me. I'm just going to look at this and see what I can figure out. That to me does not really solve the question, solve the answer, solve the mystery that is coming up. And then step 4, how do you actually make data-driven decisions? What does that entail? And that is what the optimization step is here that we're going to talk a little bit about here in the near future. And you may have noticed actually a couple of these are common in content marketing because you want to talk about reporting, you want to talk about the numbers. You want data-driven decisions to really help you determine what steps you should be taking and actions you should be taking in order to make your digital marketing efforts more efficient. Now, in section 2, data collection, this is really about what are the categories of data, and these are pretty straightforward. And most of what we have talked about thus far, and what you've probably learned in your various programs, are that everything kind of comes from this here. There's the digital marketing media data, there's tracking, and there's cookies, but that's about it. We do deal with some public data and some data from brokers, which is like a third party that has the numbers, but those generally don't inform your data-driven decisions. Now, they may do a little bit in terms of audience development and segmenting and your targeting, but when you're actually looking at the data from your own content, you're really looking at the digital marketing media data, and then a little bit over here in the right column. And I do want to differentiate 2 things here. Primary data is the stuff that you own or the company owns, and the data broker is really when you get data from other sources. In research and in academia, that's considered secondary data, but the way that we look at it in digital marketing is anytime that you're getting some analytics, some metrics from somebody else, we look at that somebody else as the broker, whether that be a company like Hootsuite or Sprout, which conducts all of their own all of their own data collection on a pretty regular basis. Or if you look at something like they talk about census data in this slide where it's just publicly available numbers that you can look at and make your own decisions. And a lot of times census data is the kind of stuff that we look at when we are trying to develop better segments for audiences, but then also when it helps us determine what are the characteristics that are common amongst various audience groups. And we're not going to be able to go and get that as primary data. Like that's just not feasible. So there's pros and cons to both types of data in this chapter. But this is really where I wanted to spend the most time. This is looking at owned, paid, and earned media. Now, we all know what these different things are. I'm not going to go through them. We know what this is. We know owned, we know paid, and we know earned. I will say the one thing that is interesting here that they talked about was in the earned media, they talked about social listening. And that's just a fancy way of saying this is the social media where people are talking about the brand. I don't know why it's listed under social listening. I consider it just really social media engagements, but it's a good blanket term, I suppose. But then from there, what do you do with those numbers, with all the data that's here? Because we go through all of these different types of media and we go and we capture all of that and all of the data. But what is it exactly that we're going to be doing with it? I will say really quickly that I don't think data quality is something that you're going to really need to be paying a ton of attention to, at least in this course. The way that I personally have experienced data cleaning and data quality in the past is when I look for outliers. And I wouldn't call them errors. However, a single outlier, and a perfect example I have is in social media when you have one post that does really well and all the others do kind of the same. And I run into this a lot with LinkedIn and with Twitter, where a one post will get, 10 times the impressions of all the others. And as a result, they'll get 10, 15 times the engagement as everybody else. Now, if you look at the percentages, the engagement rates, the click-through rates, those are usually the same as all the other posts. But the sheer impressions numbers and the engagement numbers are enough to throw everything off. And then if you're looking at those aggregates for a certain time period, those numbers suddenly make it look like you did really well on social media for a given time, a week, a month, a year, when really you are stuck kind of just like, I know I'm going to regress to the mean next month because I don't think that viral post is going to happen again. So rather, you're better off removing those posts from the averages, using those posts instead as a single data point to look at and say, all right, what can we do with this? What does this single number that stands out, what does it tell us? And what can we do with it? That to me is a really interesting concept, and not something I'm going to explore in this video today, but something I will look at a later date. Now, the last section here that I wanted to mention is the connecting of data sources. This is something that really people have trouble with, not necessarily from an academic standpoint, but in practice. And that is, how is it that you can connect all of these different data sources? In the last chapter, we talked a little bit about marketing stacks, tech stacks. How do you determine what kind of programs work well together? And the way that people tend to respond is, hey, I'm just going to go with the lowest price. I want whatever is going to give me the features that I need. But something that a lot of people don't think about is ensuring that the technology you are purchasing or utilizing is actually going to be able to connect with what you already have. Now, you think of something like MailChimp as an email marketing program, one of the leaders, almost everything connects with it. But occasionally you're going to get at that program that's like, hey, we connect with constant contact only. You might get a CRM that only connects with constant contact. And as a result, if you have MailChimp and then you go and you get that program, you are really out of luck because you can't adequately or easily connect those data sources. And as a result, you're kind of out of luck. And I personally think that the ability to connect data sources together is the deciding factor, even more so than price. If I had to pay an extra 20, 25 bucks a month in order to adequately and properly connect all of my data together, I think that's a fine price to pay. Now, the data key, this is just looking at a couple of tactical specifics. That is a field that you use to connect data across different data sources. This is usually just a number that you copy and paste when you're connecting your programs. You don't usually have to do this anymore, at least with Google and with some websites. A lot of websites make it a little bit easier to connect data sources. But again, it needs to be able to connect and integrate seamlessly. If not, you're stuck doing a manual process. And a lot of times you are stuck with, you might need the data key. You might need other things, different API information that is going to just make your life a little bit harder. Now, the other thing, we don't talk too much about SQL here. SQL stands for Structured Query Language. That is, in short, just a type of manual data connection that exists largely with CRMs that shares all sorts of data through arrays and through tables. Not something that I am an expert on by any means, and it's not something that we really get into too much in this course or the textbook. But one thing I am more familiar with are APIs, and that stands for Application Programming Interfaces. And to put this simply, this is the code that you do, it's like a code, not even a code. It's like almost like a passcode. It's just a bunch of characters that you copy and paste to connect programs to each other. An API, it makes it essentially makes a website's data publicly available. And when I say data, that's kind of a loose term. An example is Twitter. The Twitter API, well, I'm not sure about this anymore now that it's not publicly traded anymore. But when you think about a Twitter API, you can take you can use the Twitter API to adequately display a feed of tweets on your website. That is because you can take it allows for data that usually lives behind a login and allows you to put it publicly facing and embed it into whatever program you have. Conversely, or I would say similarly, you can do the same with data with metrics and the analytics that come with social media. Now, the APIs aren't necessary on a social media aggregator like Hootsuite or Sprout, but by just logging in and allowing access, that API will trigger so that the data can move from social network over to the social media scheduler. And that was the last slide. I think I was able to do this pretty quickly today. I am going to talk a little bit about cleaning data, looking at outliers at a later date, but that is not for today. This was really more about the concept of making data-driven decisions and putting yourself in a position where you can make data-driven decisions. And data-driven decisions need to be really driven by the fact that you need a business question, a business goal, or a problem to solve. And then going from there, because when you look at how we make data-driven choices, they aren't just made in a vacuum and don't just pop up. They are supposed to come out of a question that is asked and a problem that needs to be solved. And if you, in using digital marketing, have the proper tools set up and the proper marketing tech stack developed, you will be in a great position to succeed. So that is where I will stop this today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.